The trade that worked until it didn't. For years, it looked flawless, quiet, repeatable, almost boring. Then, without warning, the same trade began to unravel. To understand why this story matters today, we have to step into a period when markets felt unusually stable. Volatility was low. Interest rates moved slowly. Price patterns repeated just enough to feel dependable. Investors weren't chasing miracles. They were engineering consistency. In a world hungry for certainty, this trade promised something rare: steady returns without drama. At its core, the idea was simple: buy what barely moved, sell what moved too much, collect small gains over and over again. It didn't rely on bold predictions or secret information. It relied on structure, on historical behavior, on the belief that markets, left alone, prefer calm over chaos. As the strategy spread, it attracted a very specific kind of believer: institutions seeking predictability. Funds measured not by upside, but by how little they surprised. Models confirmed it. Backtests rewarded it. Month after month, the numbers arrived exactly as expected. What made the trade so powerful wasn't its brilliance. It was its invisibility. It didn't draw headlines. It didn't spark debate. It operated beneath the surface, quietly scaling as confidence grew. Each success made the next position feel safer. Each calm period reinforced the assumption that tomorrow would look like yesterday. But buried inside that logic was a fragile truth. The trade didn't eliminate risk. It postponed it. Every small gain depended on the same condition, holding firm: that markets would remain orderly, that exits would always be available, that everyone wouldn't rush for the door at once. At first, the warning signs were easy to ignore: minor disruptions, brief spikes, temporary noise. The strategy absorbed them effortlessly, just as it always had. And because nothing broke, nobody stopped to ask what would happen if something did. The trade kept working, right up until the moment it couldn't. The longer the trade survived, the more invisible its assumptions became. What began as a cautious strategy slowly transformed into a foundation. Positions grew larger, time horizons stretched, risk controls loosened, not because of carelessness, but because nothing had ever demanded they remain tight. As more capital flowed in, the trade began to shape the market around it. Prices adjusted faster. Volatility stayed compressed longer. Movements that once felt unusual became rare. It appeared as if the strategy wasn't just exploiting calm conditions, but reinforcing them. Stability fed the trade, and the trade fed stability. This feedback loop was subtle but powerful. Each participant believed they were small. Each assumed their exit would be orderly. Liquidity looked abundant because nobody was using it all at once. The models showed depth. The spread stayed narrow. Everything pointed to safety. However, beneath the surface, the structure was changing. Risk wasn't disappearing. It was concentrating. The same positions were being held by different institutions, often for the same reasons, often using similar signals. Diversity of thought gave way to uniformity of behavior. Small shocks began to behave differently. Where markets once absorbed them, they now hesitated. A pause here, a delayed response there. These weren't failures. They were stress tests, and each one quietly revealed how dependent the trade had become on perfect conditions. What made this phase dangerous wasn't ignorance. It was confidence. Everyone involved understood mechanics. They knew the trade's weaknesses in theory. But theory had never been tested at scale. History had never asked what happened when too many players relied on the same exit. As positions expanded, the margin for error shrank. What once required a dramatic event to fail now needed only a change in rhythm. A day when buyers hesitated. A moment when prices moved faster than models expected. Still, nothing broke. The trade adapted. Losses were small. Recoveries were fast. Each disruption reinforced a belief that the system could handle more pressure. And that belief is what carried the trade forward, directly toward its first real test. The real tension didn't arrive as a shock. It arrived as a shift. The market didn't collapse. It hesitated. Prices began moving in ways that felt unfamiliar, not extreme, just misaligned. Signals triggered earlier than expected. Correlations tightened where independence once existed. At first, managers treated it as noise. Models adjusted. Limits were nudged. The trade had survived worse on paper. But this time, something was different. The exits were slower, the bids thinner. What used to be a smooth unwind now required patience. As positions started to reduce, the feedback loop reversed. Selling no longer found immediate buyers. Each adjustment nudged prices further than anticipated. Volatility, once compressed, began to expand. And with every expansion, risk metrics worsened. This is where the trade revealed its true shape. It wasn't fragile because it was complex. It was fragile because it was crowded. Too many strategies depended on the same calm conditions. Too many portfolios needed the same assumptions to remain true. Margin calls followed, not as panic, but as procedure. Reduce exposure, raise cash, follow protocol. Yet every disciplined action pushed prices further away from equilibrium. Liquidity, once assumed infinite, proved conditional. What made the moment unsettling wasn't the losses themselves. It was the realization that nobody was in control. Each institution acted rationally. Each followed rules designed for safety. But together, those rules amplified the pressure. As volatility spiked, the trade's core promise collapsed. Small losses became large ones, not because prices moved violently, but because positions were too big to move quietly. The market was no longer absorbing risk. It was reflecting it, and as confidence evaporated, a simple truth became impossible to ignore. The trade had never been tested under stress. It had only been rehearsed under calm. Now the buildup was complete. The system had reached a point where one more movement wouldn't just hurt returns. It would force a reckoning. The breaking point didn't arrive with a crash. It arrived with exhaustion. Sellers kept selling because they had to. Buyers stepped back because they could. Prices drifted, then slipped, then accelerated, not from fear, but from mechanics. What finally ended the trade wasn't a single event. It was accumulation. Too many small stresses layered over too much shared exposure. The same strategy, once praised for its elegance, now worked in reverse. Every attempt to reduce risk created more of it. In that moment, the market revealed something uncomfortable. Stability had never been free. It had been borrowed from the future. Calm conditions weren't natural. They were engineered, reinforced, and eventually overused. When they disappeared, the costs arrived all at once. Funds that believed they were diversified discovered they were synchronized. Portfolios designed to protect against shocks learned they were built for the same environment. What failed wasn't intelligence or discipline. It was the assumption that history could be scaled without consequence. After the dust settled, the losses were measured. The reports were written. New rules were proposed. Yet the deeper lesson was quieter. Risk does not vanish because it behaves. It waits, it concentrates, and it returns precisely when it is least expected. This is why the story still matters, because the structure behind that trade never truly left. It reappears whenever markets grow calm, whenever strategies become crowded, whenever success feels routine. The details change. The logic remains. Every generation believes it's found a safer way to extract certainty from uncertainty. And for a while, it works, until the conditions that made it possible no longer exist. The trade worked, until it didn't. The trade